The silence in a marriage is often louder than the arguments, especially in a city like New York, where noise is the only constant. It begins with the smallest shift, a phone screen tilted away at dinner, a lingering glance at a stranger that lasts a second too long, and the terrifying realization that the person sleeping next to you has become a ghost in your own home. We all fear being replaced, but the true horror is being looked at by the one you love and being told you don't matter at all. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet devastation of these fractured relationships and the secrets we keep in the dark, stay with me, because there are truths here we haven't uncovered yet. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, reflecting the neon chaos of the city back at itself. Lucas Van stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of their Tribeca apartment, his forehead resting against the cold glass. Behind him, the sound of heels clicking against the hardwood floor announced Elena's entrance. It was a sharp, staccato rhythm, clack, 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 that used to sound like capability to him. Now it just sounded like a countdown. "You haven't changed," Elena said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was tight, stripped of the warmth she reserved for clients and phone calls. Lucas turned. He was still wearing the flannel shirt and jeans he had had on since morning, sketching drafts that no one wanted to buy. Elena, by contrast, was armor-clad in a black Givenchy dress, her makeup flawless, her diamond earrings catching the dim light of the kitchen pendant. She looked like a woman who owned the room. He looked like a squatter in it. "I didn't know we were going out," Lucas said softly. "I am going out," Elena corrected, tossing her clutch onto the marble island. "The Thorn Development Gala. I told you about this 3 times, Lucas. I stopped expecting you to remember my schedule months ago." "Thorn," Lucas repeated. The name tasted like ash. Julian Thorn, the real estate mogul who is currently reshaping the meatpacking district. "You're spending a lot of time with him lately." Elena paused in the middle of checking her lipstick in the hallway mirror. Her eyes flicked to Lucas's reflection, cold and assessing. "He's a client, Lucas. He pays for this apartment. He pays for the food you eat while you sit here and draw buildings that defy the laws of physics." "They don't defy physics," Lucas muttered, a tired defense he had made 1,000 times. "They defy budget constraints. There's a difference." To the real world, it's the same thing. She turned around, crossing her arms. The disappointment in her posture was so heavy, it felt like it sucked the oxygen out of the room. "Julian is visionary, but he's practical. He actually builds things. He doesn't just dream about them in a sketchbook." Lucas looked down at the drafting table in the corner. It was covered in blueprints for a spire that utilized a new tension-based structural integrity. To Elena, they were doodles. To him, they were the future. But the future didn't pay the HOA fees in Tribeca. "I have a meeting with the firm in Chicago next week," Lucas offered, trying to bridge the gap. "They like the cantilever concept." "Chicago liked the concept," Elena echoed, her tone flat. "Just like the firm in Seattle liked the concept. Just like the terrifying amount of debt we are in liked the concept." "It's been 4 years, Lucas. At what point do you admit that maybe you're not a misunderstood genius? Maybe you're just—" She trailed off, but the word hung there. Incompetent. Her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up. It wasn't a work email, it was a text message. The preview was short. "I'm downstairs. Don't be late." Lucas saw it. He knew she knew he saw it. For a moment, the air in the apartment went static. A normal wife would have snatched the phone. A guilty wife would have explained. Elena did neither. She simply looked at him, daring him to ask, daring him to start the fight that would end them. "Have fun," Lucas said, his voice barely a whisper. He felt a profound sense of shrinking, as if he were disappearing piece by piece. Elena picked up her phone. She didn't look back as she walked to the door. "Don't wait up," she said. "I'll be late. We need to discuss the structural integrity of the merger." The door clicked shut, the lock engaged. Lucas stood alone in the dark apartment, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, a black town car was waiting. Somewhere down there, his wife was sliding into the back seat, smiling a smile he hadn't seen in years. He placed his hand on the glass again, looking at the skyline. so full of concrete, steel, and ego. There was no space for him out there, not yet. But the silence in the room was beginning to sound less like loneliness and more like a decision. The gala was held in the meatpacking district, inside a converted industrial warehouse that Julian Thorne had gutted and reborn as a temple of glass and polished concrete. It was exactly the kind of architecture Lucas despised: sterile, imposing, and devoid of soul. But the 300 people sipping champagne inside seemed to think it was a masterpiece. Lucas stood near a pillar wrapped in velvet, nursing a drink he hadn't tasted. He had worn his only suit, a charcoal gray that was 5 years old and slightly tight across the shoulders. Around him, the room was a sea of tailored Italian wool and silk gowns that cost more than his student loans. He felt like a smudge on a pristine lens. "Smile, Lucas. You look like you're attending a funeral." Elena materialized beside him, sliding her arm through his. The gesture looked affectionate to an observer, but Lucas felt the pinch of her fingers on his bicep. A warning, not a caress. She was radiant, her social mask firmly in place, feeding off the energy of the room in a way that exhausted him just to watch. "I'm trying," Lucas said, adjusting his tie. "It's just loud." "It's networking," she hissed, smiling broadly at a passing senator. "Try to talk to someone. Anyone. Don't just stand here like a piece of furniture I forgot to return." Before Lucas could respond, the crowd parted. The shift in atmosphere was palpable, a gravitational pull toward the center of the room. Julian Thorne had arrived. He was taller than Lucas expected, with the kind of predatory grace that comes from knowing you own the ground everyone else is standing on. He moved through the crowd not like a host, but like a monarch, shaking hands and clapping shoulders. When his eyes landed on Elena, his smile shifted. It wasn't the polite grin of a business partner. It was the possessive smirk of a man who knew a secret. "Elena," Julian said, his voice a rich baritone that cut through the ambient jazz. He bypassed two waiting investors to reach her. "You outdid yourself with the press release. The mayor is actually impressed." "I only work with the best material, Julian," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming sultry. She released Lucas's arm to take Julian's hand. Lucas stood there, untethered. For a long 10 seconds, he didn't exist. He watched the way Julian's thumb grazed the back of Elena's hand, a violation of professional boundaries that was so casual it had to be habitual. Finally, Julian's gaze flicked to Lucas. It was brief, dismissive, the way one looks at a waiter. "And this must be the husband," Julian said. He didn't offer a hand. "Elena tells me you draw." "Draw, not design, not engineer. Draw, like a child with crayons." "I'm a structural engineer," Lucas corrected, keeping his voice steady despite the heat rising in his neck. "I specialize in high-altitude tension systems." Julian chuckled, a dry sound. "Fascinating. Well, maybe one day you'll build something we can actually see." He turned his back on Lucas, effectively building a wall between them, and focused entirely on Elena. "There's someone from the zoning board you need to charm." "Walk with me?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't look back at Lucas to apologize or check if he was okay. She simply stepped into Julian's orbit, her laughter blending with his as they walked away toward the VIP section. Lucas remained by the velvet pillar. A waiter passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, maneuvering around him as if he were an obstacle. He looked across the room, watching his wife touch Julian's arm, watching her head tilt back as she laughed at something he whispered. He realized then that he wasn't just losing her. He had already lost her. He was simply the last person in the room to accept it. The isolation hit him harder than the noise. A cold, hollow certainty that he was no longer a participant in his own marriage. He was just a shadow she cast, and the sun was setting. It was 2:43 a.m. when the lock tumbled. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen island, a cold mug of coffee between his hands. The apartment was dark, save for the under-cabinet lighting that cast a clinical glow on the marble countertop. He hadn't changed out of his suit from the gala. He felt like he was still wearing a costume. Elena entered, bringing with her the scent of rain and a cologne that wasn't his. Sandalwood and expensive tobacco. Julian's brand. She looked disheveled in a way that wasn't from the weather. Her lipstick was worn off, and there was a frenetic energy in her movements as she kicked off her heels. She froze when she saw him. For a split second, there was fear in her eyes, raw and unguarded. Then the mask slipped back into place. Annoyance. "Why are you sitting in the dark, Lucas? It's creepy." "I called your office," Lucas said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "At midnight, security said the floor has been empty since 6. Elena walked past him to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water. She didn't look at him. "I was at a site meeting. We moved venues." "At 2 in the morning? Real estate doesn't sleep, Lucas. Just because you have the luxury of unemployment doesn't mean the rest of us do." She slammed the fridge door shut, the glass rattling. "I saw the photos," Lucas lied. He hadn't, but he knew. He could feel it in the air pressure of the room. Elena turned slowly. She gripped the water bottle so hard her knuckles turned white. The silence stretched between them, a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask what photos. She just stared at him with a sudden, chilling clarity. "So what?" she whispered. The air left Lucas's lungs. He had expected a lie. He had expected tears. He hadn't expected this dull, flat indifference. "So what?" Lucas repeated, standing up. "Elena, you're my wife." "Am I?" She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Because I don't feel like a wife, Lucas. I feel like a sponsor. I feel like a mother to a grown man who refuses to grow up." "I am trying," Lucas said, his voice cracking. "I am building a portfolio." "You are building nothing," Elena screamed. The sudden volume made him flinch. "You sit here all day drawing fantasy towers while I go out there and secure our future." "Julian respects me. Julian sees me. When I'm with him, I feel like I exist. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm suffocating under the weight of your potential that never goes anywhere." "Is that why you slept with him? Because he has money?" "I slept with him because he's a man who matters." Elena threw her hands up, the water bottle hitting the counter with a thud. "Look at you, Lucas. Look at your life. You have no name. You have no legacy. You are 34 years old and you are invisible." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with a cruel, toxic light. She wanted to hurt him. She needed to hurt him to make her own sin feel like a necessity. "You're worthless, Lucas," she spat the words out like venom. "You are a ghost in this city. If you died tomorrow, the only thing that would change is that I'd have one less bill to pay. You have no footprint. You are nothing." Lucas stood there, the word worthless echoing in the cavern of his chest. It didn't make him angry. It didn't make him want to fight. It simply severed the last thread holding him to the floor. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had promised to build a life with. She wasn't there anymore. In her place was a stranger terrified of her own mediocrity, desperate to climb on anyone to feel tall. "Okay," Lucas said. It was the only word left. Elena blinked, thrown off by his quiet surrender. She breathed heavily, her chest heaving, waiting for him to scream back, to give her the fight she needed to justify her betrayal. But Lucas just turned around and walked toward the bedroom. He didn't look back at her. He didn't look back at the kitchen where they had cooked dinner, or the living room where they had watched movies. He looked straight ahead into the dark. "Lucas," she called out, her voice faltering slightly. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer. He had nothing left to say to a stranger. 4 a.m. in New York City is the only time the island feels like it belongs to the lost. The traffic thins to a distant hum, and the streetlights buzz with a lonely, electric persistence. Lucas moved through the bedroom like a thief. Elena was asleep. She lay on her side, one arm thrown over the empty space where he usually slept, her breathing deep and rhythmic. In the pale blue light filtering through the sheer curtains, she looked innocent again. The sharp lines of her ambition were softened by sleep. The cruel mouth that had called him worthless was relaxed. It was a painful trick of biology, reminding him of the woman he had loved, just as he was about to leave her forever. He didn't bring a suitcase. A suitcase implied a trip. This wasn't a trip. He took his battered leather duffel bag from the back of the closet. He packed methodically, his movements precise and silent. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, his drafting compass, the set of high-grade architectural pens his father had given him, the hard drive containing the designs for the ether, the project Elena called a fantasy, the one he had been working on in secret for 2 years. He left the Armani suit. He left the watch she had bought him for their anniversary, the one he knew she had put on a credit card he paid off. He left the life she had curated for him, and he walked into the bathroom. On the marble counter next to her chaotic spread of serums and perfumes, his toothbrush looked solitary. He picked it up, then put it back. He wouldn't need it where he was going. He wanted nothing that had tasted this air. Back in the kitchen, he stood over the granite island. His phone sat there, a sleek black rectangle that connected him to everyone he knew. He picked it up and navigated to the settings. With a few taps, he deactivated his social media accounts. Then he popped the SIM card slot. The tiny chip fell onto the counter with a nearly inaudible click. He left the phone next to the SIM card. He didn't write a note. Notes were for people who might be misunderstood, for people who wanted to be found or forgiven. He had been understood perfectly. Elena had defined him clearly. Worthless. There was nothing to add to that definition. He slid his wedding band off his finger. It left a pale indentation on his skin, a ghost of a bind that would take time to fade. He placed the gold ring on top of the dark screen of the dead phone. The apartment was silent. It was a tomb of expensive furniture and dead dreams. Lucas walked to the door. He didn't look back. He didn't allow himself the indulgence of a final, sentimental glance. If he looked back, he might remember the good years, and the good years were the lie. The truth was the woman sleeping in the other room who despised him. He opened the door and stepped out into the doorway. The latch clicked shut behind him, a final mechanical period at the end of a sentence. Outside, the air was cold and smelled of wet pavement. He walked 3 blocks to the subway station, his bag light on his shoulder. He caught the E-train uptown to Penn Station. He bought a one-way ticket to Chicago on the first train out. Not because he had a job there, but because it was a city of steel and wind, a place where he could be cold and it would make sense. Elena woke up at 8:30 a.m. The light was streaming in, harsh and bright. She rolled over, her hand brushing the cold sheet beside her. "Lucas?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. Silence. She sat up, rubbing her temples. The headache from the champagne and the argument, however, was a dull throb behind her eyes. She expected to find him in the kitchen, making coffee, wearing that wounded puppy dog look he always had after a fight. She was ready to be magnanimous, to accept his apology for embarrassing her at the gala. She walked into the living room. "Lucas, stop sulking. We need to talk about the schedule for next week." The apartment was perfectly still, the kind of stillness that feels heavy. She walked into the kitchen. The coffee machine was cold. The blinds were still drawn. On the island, a beam of sunlight hit something metallic. She walked over. There, sitting on the black granite, was his phone. Next to it was the tiny destroyed SIM card. And resting on top of the screen was his wedding ring. Elena picked up the ring. It was cold. She looked around the apartment, her heart skipping a beat, not out of heartbreak, but out of a sudden, disorienting shock. The closet door was ajar. She checked it. His duffel bag was gone. "Lucas?" she said again, louder this time. But the name just bounced off the walls. For the first time in years, the apartment felt huge. It felt empty. She gripped the ring in her hand, waiting for the panic to set in. But instead, a strange sensation washed over her. She looked at the empty space where he usually sat, cluttering her aesthetic with his sketches. It was gone. He was gone. She took a deep breath. The air felt thinner, lighter. "Fine," she whispered to the empty room, a small, cold smile touching her lips. "Be gone." She didn't know yet that the silence wasn't him leaving. It was the sound of her life beginning to collapse, one quiet brick at a time. 2 years later, the view from the penthouse on 57th Street was exactly what Elena had always promised herself. From here, Central Park looked like a dark, manicured rug thrown over the city's floor. The lights of the Upper West Side twinkled with the promise of old money, and the sound of traffic was nothing more than a distant, oceanic hum. Elena sat at her dining table, a slab of imported Italian marble that was cold to the touch. Opposite her sat Julian. "The merger with the Beckett Group is stalling," Julian said, not looking up from his phone. The blue light from the screen washed over his face, making him look statuesque but lifeless. They're worried about the zoning laws in Brooklyn. I can handle the press, Elena said, taking a sip of her Pinot Noir. It was a vintage she used to dream of affording. Now it tasted acidic. I'll spin it as a community revitalization project. They'll eat it up. Good, Julian murmured. He swiped a finger across the screen, dismissing her solution as easily as he dismissed a notification. That's what I pay you for. Elena paused. The glass hovered near her lips. That's what I pay you for. They weren't married. They weren't even really dating anymore, not in the way people date. They were a merger of assets. She was his public face, the woman who smoothed his edges at galas. He was her ticket to the inner circle. She had moved into his world, into his rhythm, but she had never really moved into his heart. Julian, she said softly, it's our anniversary, sort of. 2 years since she had become the official partner of Julian Thorne. 2 years since Lucas had vanished. Julian finally looked up. His eyes were clear, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. Is it? I thought we agreed not to do the sentimental thing, Elena. It's pedestrian. I know, she said, forcing a smile. I just thought, maybe dinner without the phones? Julian sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. He placed the phone face down on the table. You've been needy lately, Elle. It doesn't suit you. You're sharper than this. I'm not needy, I'm just lonely. The word caught in her throat. She couldn't say it. To say it was to admit defeat. You're tired, Julian decided for her. He checked his watch. I have to meet the zoning commissioner at the Soho house in 30 minutes. You should stay in tonight. Get some rest. You have the press conference tomorrow. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. He walked over to her, kissed her on the forehead, a dry, perfunctory peck, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Elena sat alone in the sprawling, beautiful apartment. It was filled with art she hadn't chosen and furniture she was afraid to scratch. She was surrounded by millions of dollars of success, yet she felt like a squatter. She stood up and walked to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, impeccably dressed, terrifyingly composed. She looked like a winner. She walked to her laptop, which sat open on the side table. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. It was a ritual she performed once a month, always late at night, always with a glass of wine in hand. She opened a private browser window. She typed, Lucas Vance, enter. The screen refreshed. Search results. Lucas Vance, LinkedIn, page not found. Lucas Vance, structural engineer, last active 2 years ago. Obituaries matching Lucas Vance, 0 results. Nothing. He hadn't died. He hadn't become famous. He hadn't updated his portfolio. He had simply ceased to exist. A twisted sense of relief washed over her. If he had succeeded, if he had built something magnificent, it would have meant she was wrong. It would have meant she had bet on the wrong horse. But this silence, this digital void, it proved her right. He was worthless. He had gone to Chicago or wherever, and he had failed. He was probably working in a hardware store or drafting extensions for suburban garages. See, she whispered to the empty room. I made the right choice. She closed the laptop. She finished her wine. She turned off the lights. But as she walked to the bedroom she often slept in alone while Julian was working late, the silence felt different than it had 2 years ago. Back then, the silence was an accusation from a man who loved her. Now, the silence was simply the absence of anyone at all. She lay down on the silk sheets, closing her eyes. She had the view. She had the money. She had the man everyone wanted. Why then did she feel like she was falling? 5 more years dissolved into the relentless grid of Manhattan. 7 years total since the apartment in Tribeca went quiet. Elena stood in the boardroom of Thorne Development, her palms pressed flat against the mahogany table. The room was tense. 12 senior executives, men who smelled of cedar and aggression, were staring at a projection on the screen. It wasn't a rendering of one of their buildings. It was a photograph of the ether. The skyscraper had risen in Midtown like a shard of impossible geometry. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a glitch in reality. While the surrounding towers were heavy with steel and stone, the ether seemed to be made of light and tension. It twisted as it rose, a cantilevered miracle that defied gravity, reflecting the sky so perfectly that, on cloudy days, The upper floors seemed to disappear completely. It was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen, and it terrified her. How do we still not know who the lead architect is? Julian's voice was a low growl from the head of the table. He was older now, the gray at his temples harder to hide, his patience worn thin by a market that was starting to bore him. The holding company is a shell within a shell, based in Zurich, a nervous analyst explained, adjusting his glasses. The construction permits were filed under Vantage Group, but the design is anonymous. They're calling it the ghost tower in the press. I don't care what they call it, Julian snapped. I care that it's casting a shadow over our Fifth Avenue project. Everyone is talking about the ether. No one is talking about Thorn Tower. He turned his gaze to Elena. It was a look devoid of the lust that had started their affair 7 years ago. Now it was purely transactional. Elena, you're supposed to be the queen of spin. Why can't we get a meeting with the developers? We need the contract for the plaza. If we can't own the building, we need to own the ground it sits on. I've tried, Julian, Elena said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. They aren't taking meetings. They aren't looking for partners. They're silent. She looked back at the screen. The building captivated her. There was something about the lines, the way the tension was distributed, the audacity of the structure, that triggered a deep, buried memory. It felt like a language she had once heard spoken in her sleep. It felt like the sketches that used to clutter her kitchen island, the ones she had swept into the trash with a sigh of annoyance. But that was impossible. Lucas was a failure. Lucas was paper concepts. This was billion-dollar steel. The unveiling is next Friday, the analyst continued. They just sent out the press invitations. It's highly exclusive. Get us in, Julian commanded. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. I want front row. I want to look this mystery architect in the eye and buy him out before he finishes his opening speech. As the room cleared, Elena remained, staring at the image of the tower. Coming? Julian asked from the doorway, buttoning his jacket. In a minute, Elena said. She walked to the window of the boardroom. From here, 40 stories up, she could see the actual structure in the distance. It dominated the skyline, making the Empire State Building look antiquated and the Chrysler Building look small. It was arrogant. It was magnificent. It was a shout into the void that demanded to be heard. She felt a chill run down her spine, a cold premonition that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. The silence that Lucas had left behind 7 years ago had been heavy. But this was different. This was the silence before a thunderclap. She pulled out her phone and checked the digital invitation that had just landed in her inbox. The Ether, Grand Unveiling, Lead Architect Keynote. There was no name attached, just a location and a time. Elena touched the screen, tracing the line of the building. Why did she feel like she was walking into a trap? Why did she feel like the building was watching her? Who are you? She whispered to the glass city. The skyline didn't answer. It just waited. The night of the unveiling, the sky over Manhattan broke open. It wasn't a soft rain, it was a deluge, a curtain of water that turned the city streets into black mirrors. At the base of the ether, the rain didn't matter. A massive cantilevered canopy of glass and steel extended over the plaza, sheltering the 300 guests who had gathered like moths to a very expensive flame. The air was electric with the kind of hush that money buys, the rustle of silk, the click of cameras, the murmur of speculation. Elena stood next to Julian near the front of the stage. She wore a dress that cost more than her first car, but she felt stripped bare. She was shivering, though the air was warm. Relax, Julian muttered, checking his watch. You look like you're waiting for an execution. I have a bad feeling, Elena whispered. She couldn't take her eyes off the podium. It was stark, modern, lit by a single spotlight that cut through the darkness. It's just a building, Elena, and whoever built it has a price. We just need to find the number. Julian adjusted his cufflinks, his arrogance a familiar, suffocating weight. He didn't see the art, he only saw the asset. The lights in the plaza dimmed. The murmur of the crowd died instantly. A voice echoed over the speakers, smooth, disembodied. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ether. Tonight, we do not just unveil a building, we unveil a new philosophy of height. Please welcome the principal architect and founder of Vantage Group. The name hung in the air for a second, unsaid. Then, a figure walked out from the shadows behind the stage. He didn't walk with the hurried, apologetic gait of the man she remembered. He moved with a slow, predatory grace. He wore a bespoke navy suit that fit him like a second skin, tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was shorter, touched with gray at the temples, lending him an authority he had never possessed in their kitchen in Tribeca. He stepped into the spotlight. He looked out at the sea of faces, his expression unreadable, calm, terrifyingly composed. Elena stopped breathing. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that felt like it might tear her throat open. "Good evening," Lucas Vance said. His voice was deeper, resonant, stripped of the hesitation that used to plague him. It wasn't the voice of a man who asked for permission. It was the voice of a man who gave commands. Beside her, Julian stiffened. "I know that face," he whispered, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Where do I know that face?" He didn't remember. To Julian, Lucas had been a piece of furniture, a momentary obstacle 7 years ago. But to Elena, the face was a ghost story come to life. 7 years ago, Lucas continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't look at notes. He didn't need them. "I left this city with nothing but a bag of clothes and a belief that structure is not about holding things up. It is about holding things together when the world tries to pull them apart." He paused. His gaze seemed to drift over the front row. For a heartbeat, Elena felt his eyes lock onto hers. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was worse. It was a look of total, absolute recognition, followed by complete indifference. He saw her, and she didn't matter. "They told me," Lucas said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips, "that my designs were impossible, that they were worthless." The word hit Elena like a physical blow. Worthless. The echo of her own voice from that rainy Tuesday night came rushing back, drowning out the applause that was starting to ripple through the crowd. "But a building," Lucas said, gesturing to the tower rising infinitely above them, "doesn't care what you call it. It only cares if it stands. And this stands." As he spoke, the lights on the building ignited. A vertical line of illumination shot up the spine of the tower, piercing the clouds. And there, etched into the cornerstone in simple, brutalist granite, was the name of the firm. Vance and Associates. Julian drew a sharp breath. He turned to Elena, his face pale with realization. "Vance, Elena, isn't that—" "Yes," Elena whispered, tears finally spilling over, hot and humiliating. "That's your husband," Julian said, the realization dawning on him with the horror of a man who realizes he has underestimated his enemy. "Ex-husband," Elena corrected, her voice breaking. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. They had never divorced. She was still legally bound to the man on the stage. The man who was currently the most powerful architect in the world. The man she had thrown away like trash. Lucas finished his speech and stepped back, the applause thundering around him like a storm. He didn't bow. He simply nodded, turned, and walked away, disappearing back into the structure he had built from the ruins of the self-esteem she had tried to destroy. Elena stood in the rain, surrounded by billionaires and cameras, and felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She was looking at the skyscraper, but all she could see was the height of her own regret. The VIP reception was held in the atrium of the Ether, a soaring space of glass and white stone that made the guests look like insects trapped in a crystal jar. "Go to him," Julian hissed, gripping Elena's elbow. His charm had evaporated, replaced by the desperate hunger of a shark that smells blood in the water. "He's still legally your husband, Elena. Use that. We need the plaza contract. If you don't get a meeting, we're finished in Midtown." "Julian, I can't," Elena pleaded, her voice trembling. "Did you see how he looked at me?" "I saw a man who just increased his net worth by $1 billion, Julian snapped. "Fix this, or don't bother coming into the office. Tomorrow." He shoved her gently but firmly toward the back of the room, where a small cluster of security guards blocked the entrance to the private elevators. Elena walked through the crowd as if in a trance. She felt the eyes of the city's elite on her. not admiring her dress or her status, but sensing her desperation. She reached the security cordon just as the crowd parted. Lucas was there. He was putting on a long black wool coat, preparing to leave Tremaine's. He was flanked by two assistants who were furiously typing on tablets, but he looked serene, untouched by the chaos he had created. Lucas, Elena said. The name came out strangled, small, but he heard it. He stopped. He turned slowly. When his eyes met hers, the room seemed to freeze. The assistants paused. The security guard stiffened. Elena, he said, his tone was polite, distant, the way you greet a neighbor you haven't seen in a decade and didn't particularly like. Elena swallowed hard, fighting the urge to cry, to scream, to fall to her knees. It's magnificent. The building, it's magnificent. Thank you, Lucas said. He buttoned his coat. It took a long time to get the foundation right. Lucas, I didn't know, she rushed on, the words tumbling out. If I had known you were capable of this, you would have stayed? Lucas finished the sentence for her. A faint, humorless smile played on his lips. I know, that's why I left. I'm sorry, she whispered, for what I said, for that night. I was angry. I didn't mean it. Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 7 years. He studied her face like a structural flaw he had already corrected. You meant every word, Elena, he said softly. And you were right. The man you married was worthless. He was weak because he measured his value through your eyes. I had to become nothing to you so I could become something to myself. Does that mean, do you hate me? Hate you? Lucas shook his head, a genuine look of confusion crossing his face. No, hate requires energy, Elena. I don't have any energy for you. I haven't thought about you in years. The indifference was a blade, sharper and cleaner than any anger could have been. Anger would have meant she still held power over him. Indifference meant she was already gone. My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow regarding the divorce, Lucas said, checking his watch. I've been busy, or I would have handled it sooner. You can keep the apartment in Tribeca. I have no use for it. Lucas, wait. Elena took a step forward, reaching for his arm. Julian, he wants to talk. He wants to work with you. Lucas paused. He looked over Elena's shoulder to where Julian Thorne was watching from across the room, holding a glass of champagne with a trembling hand. Lucas's eyes were cold, assessing, and dismissive. Tell Mr. Thorne, Lucas said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality, that I don't build on shaky ground. His buildings have no soul, and neither do his partners. He turned his back on her. Goodbye, Elena. He walked through the glass doors and out into the rainy night, flanked by his team, moving toward a waiting car. He didn't look back at the tower he had built. He didn't look back at the woman he had loved. He simply moved forward. Elena stood alone in the atrium. Julian approached her, his face twisted in anticipation. Well, Julian demanded, did you get it? Did you fix it? Elena looked at the man she had destroyed her marriage for. He looked small. He looked cheap. He looked like a bad investment. She looked up, through the glass ceiling, to the spire of the ether piercing the storm clouds above. It was a monument to everything she had called worthless. It was a giant, steel and glass proof of her own failure. No, Elena whispered, the tears finally falling freely, washing away the last of her pride. I didn't fix it. I broke it. And some things can't be rebuilt. She stood there, at the bottom of his world, while the rain continued to fall on the city that now belonged to him.